Welcome in. This is a segment from the Slumpbuster Fantasy Football Podcast with Aris Blakeney. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. Enjoy.
This is a pass-happy league, so there's some really good quarterbacks in this top 25. There are some questions as well, especially down towards the bottom. But, our top five, we have Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Baker Mayfield, Deshaun Watson, and Russell Wilson. Even though they were a running offense last year, he still finished top 10 in, quarterback points scored for the season. So, how do you feel about this top five?
Well, looking at the top five here, and I guess I should start with this question. Right now, looking at Patrick Mahomes' ADP being 16, if you had to draft Mahomes, if you had to draft a quarterback early, when's the earliest you would feel comfortable taking one?
Not the second round. It's probably going to be, years past where you're reaching for Rodgers or for Brady or for Breeze in that, late third into the fourth. Probably, the earliest I would ever reach for a quarterback. But second round, I feel like you can just get so much more value on a week-to-week basis. You're giving up a top running back or a top receiver trying to get Mahomes in the second round right now.
Yeah, and definitely I love building up my depth early. So it's a little tough when I look at the quarterback position and I'm looking at these early guys, because most of the time I'm not going to be drafting these guys. I mostly just have to have the right value, which for me, at minimum, is going to be third round. You could talk me into taking Mahomes if he was there. I know in most leagues he's not. I know Rodgers is probably not going to be there in the fourth round either when I want to take him, and so on and so forth. So when I'm looking at these guys, you want to look at someone who's going to be truly a difference maker at the position, who's going to provide intrinsically more value than all of his competitors week to week. The only one I really see being at that level is going to be Mahomes. If his draft stock was a little lower, again, I would love to have him. But right now, he's just going way too high. I just don't see myself taking him. He's the only one I can really justify out of this five drafting if you had to, though.
Yeah, so he scored 60 more points than the next closest quarterback, which was Matt Ryan. 60 points for a quarterback, that's a big gap in that. But in all of my leagues last year, nobody that was in the championship league or championship game had Mahomes on their team. So I just don't see how you can justify taking a quarterback that high when you can get another top tier quarterback, later on. Big Ben is down there. Philip Rivers is down there. Brady is down there still. So I just don't see reaching on a quarterback that early.
I would counter and say that the reason to wait on quarterback is Mahomes from last year. So if you waited on quarterback last year, you were taking Mahomes potentially as the 14th or 15th quarterback off the board in round 10 or later. And obviously you look at what he did. You mentioned the 60 points more than any other quarterback. Hey, there's value later on in this draft. We're going to talk about it once we get further down your list. There's guys that could potentially jump all the way from 25 all the way to top 5 minimum. So that's why you wait. That's why you don't hurt yourself later on. I think if you're the first guy to draft a quarterback in a league, you're already starting off from negative.
Yeah, like I said, you can get one of those top tier quarterbacks later on. Big Ben threw for 5,000 yards last year. Philip Rivers throws for 4,500 yards and 28 touchdowns almost every year. You even have some of the younger guys, Jimmy G coming back from injury in that Shanahan offense. Look what Shanahan did with Matt Ryan in his MVP year. So you still have a lot of value-based quarterbacks lower down in the draft. So I just don't like it. Mm-hmm. On to the next group. We have Cam, who is a little banged up, but hopefully he's over that shoulder injury. This now is a foot injury, so at least it's something different. Breeze, Goff, Wentz, and Matt Ryan. Who do you like out of these 10? Would you reach on somebody here?
The only one I really like out of this group, and it's only because of, again, when it comes to these guys, I'm looking for someone who could peak above the rest of the position. And I think that's going to be Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz's value is probably never going to be lower than it is right now, considering he was a guy that was an MVP candidate just a couple years back. So if I can snag this guy up in the 7th or 8th round, I'm going to be very pleased with myself. When I look at some of the other guys you mentioned who are in this tier, Cam, one of his bigger pluses to drafting him was his ability as a runner. Well, that's going to get greatly reduced this year, especially since he's dealing with that mid-foot sprain. Breeze, we saw the wheels kind of starting to fall off the bus. Now, don't get me wrong, when it comes to, and this is where you talk the difference between real-life football and fantasy football, Breeze is still a fantastic quarterback in what he does for the Saints. However, what he's going to do for your fantasy team is going to be a lesser role. You could definitely see them wanting to flip the page and turn more towards utilizing Alvin Kamara. And you did mention the lack of wide receiver targets around him, Michael Thomas, this year. So he's going to be one of the bigger ones I want to stay away from this year. Then I do like Matt Ryan, but Matt Ryan's just going to be in that 8 to 9 ranked quarterback each and every year. He's not going to peak, or at least peak in the same way he did in 2016. So a lot of guys that are unexciting. The only one I can really get excited about in this tier is going to be Wentz.
Yeah, I like the draft mates Wentz and Goff. You saw Goff, how well he did in this offense last year. He threw the ball very well. He's developing a deep throw. It's actually a pretty ball when it comes out. But yeah, Wentz, if he can stay healthy, he's my favorite quarterback in this tier.
My counter when it comes to Goff, though, is he could potentially hurt you in the fantasy playoffs. We saw when it mattered, that game against Chicago, going outdoors, going in the cold weather, he looked far from the quarterback that helped you a lot of times in the season's early going. I do agree, obviously, the Rams' offense leaves a lot of opportunity for Goff. However, I just worry about that later in the season when you're really counting on him. What's he going to give to your team?
Yeah, those fantasy playoffs are definitely where you want your guys to peak. You don't want them falling off, especially as the Rams offense did with Goff falling off, with Gurley falling off as well. So we'll see how he does later on in the year. But early season, Goff's a good pickup. A lot of times people are, they run 2 quarterbacks on their team, and you might be switching them in and out. So Goff is a good, safe pick. They're going to throw the ball, especially if he dubs off of, a screen to Gurley and he takes it to the house for 80 yards. That's a bonus for you. Next set, we have Big Ben, Kirk Cousins, Mitchell Trubisky, Philip Rivers, and Jameis Winston, who is in a prove-it year. Who do you like out of this group?
Probably for the value and hoping he doesn't get benched, I would probably lean Winston just in terms of if Bruce Arians does right the ship with him, he could potentially be a 30-plus touchdown quarterback. However, if he has one game where he throws 4 or 5 picks, he also has the lowest floor because he could be a weekly 0 and cut off your roster by week 6. So it is a little bit worrisome. You're playing with dynamite when you do draft Jameis Winston for this very reason. I probably like Philip Rivers probably the best out of this group. Not to pat the hose on the back too hard with his Chargers here, but I love that Rivers just is so consistent. It's something that I could count on, a known quantity, and I value that, especially when we start getting into these later quarterbacks. In fact, I feel like I'm going to end up with Rivers on a lot of my teams this year just because he's not the most exciting, so not a lot of people go out of their way to draft him, and he just kind of falls to me every time I go in a mock draft right now. So I'm probably like Rivers the most out of this year. Trubisky has some potential. Obviously, he's shown his ability as a runner. He had that one blow-up week last year against the Bucs. But the Bucs were a bad defense, and then we did see him start to fall off again in the tail end of the season. So it's probably how I feel about this tier of guys.
Yeah, my biggest question mark in this tier is going to be Kirk Cousins. Nobody really knows what he is. We don't know if he's elite. We don't know if he's terrible quarterback due to his prime time and teams over 500 record. And he's guaranteed all that money, so they're kind of forced to stick with him. Last year he was up and down, up and down, up and down. He 30 points one week, 16 points the next week, 25 points the next week. So he's kind of all over the place. He does kind of level out average-wise because he has so many peaks and valleys. But like you said, week to week, consistency, Cousins really isn't your man. But you may be forced to pick him if he falls to you and there's nobody else available.
I did kind of gloss over Big Ben, and I do want to kind of mention him as well. He didn't finish in the top 5 of this position last year. I don't know if necessarily the Steelers are going to maintain the same level of offense that they did. But, if you're getting him right now, he's going, 113, so that would make him, so if you could get Big Ben in the round 10, that could also be a nice little steal for your team.
He's always mulling retirement. He lost AB. He has Juju now. He doesn't really have a number 2 receiver. The running back situation seems to be in flux because they are looking like they want to do a committee. I'm not a big fan of Big Ben just because it seems in this last couple of years he's making more and more mistakes with the ball. And I don't want somebody that throws a lot of interceptions.
But I do feel like this is a big year for him. Obviously, he has been challenged a lot on his leadership with this team, come under fire because of the whole AB situation. So I feel like Ben has a lot to prove, and that's something we haven't seen from Big Ben in a while, him with a chip on his shoulder. So I feel like that's very underrated, what influence that could have in the mind of Big Ben as he moves into this year. You mentioned mauling retirement. I think that that's going to be the last thought in his head this year. My only real concern with Big Ben is potential for injuries. He has struggled with that in the past, and he's been very lucky the last couple of years. He's been relatively healthy, but you never know. He is an aging quarterback, and he is one of the most difficult quarterbacks to tackle, so he does take bigger hits than your average QB.
Yeah, all those big hits can and probably will eventually catch up to him. But, like I said, 5,000 yards last year. I don't see him doing that again. That's what propelled him to a top 5 fantasy finish last year with all those yards. I don't really see him throwing that many this year. All right, on to the next guys. We have Dak, Jimmy G, Brady, Lamar Jackson, and Andy Dalton, who's a curious case. He's on the hot seat. He's kind of turning into that Tannehill situation that Miami had where he's good enough to keep, but not good enough to, get you anywhere. So, what do you think about these next guys?
Obviously, I'm going to show my bias, but I think that Jimmy G has the highest potential out of this group. If he can come anywhere close to 2016 Matt Ryan and you're drafting him here, then that could really shape a lot of fantasy championships. And right now, given everything that he's had to deal with in the last 2 weeks, he has been devalued so much that people aren't even thinking about him in the same way. So if you're looking for a steal, Jimmy G could be your guy. You look around so obviously Jimmy G and Brady are always going to be continuously tied. So you look at this tier, it's kind of funny having them back to back. But Brady, it's going to be a run-first offense this year. He tailed off at the end of last year. He's just not the same Tom Brady that you were drafting like 3 to 4 years ago. So I don't see necessarily the value in drafting him. When it comes to Lamar could be an interesting one. Obviously, the running element for a quarterback is not something to undervalue, especially if you're in a 4-point per passing touchdown league. But at the end of the day, for the quarterback position, you have to be able to throw the ball. His ceiling is capped to a certain point, and he also leaves himself more available for injuries, given his style of play. And the last one to finish off the tier, you did mention Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton has been one of the most interesting fantasy commodities the last few years. Like, he's week to week probably not going to be a difference maker, but if you're looking for a guy that just hold the fort down for your roster or for your team, Andy Dalton's good, especially if you're in a deeper league. I'd feel comfortable putting out Andy Dalton as my starter.
Yeah, so Andy Dalton, I don't feel like he's going to be a week-to-week starter. I feel he's going to fit into more of that injury replacement or bye-week streamer. He lost his favorite target in A.J. Green. Mixon developed as a runner, so they might, run the ball more. But he is on the hot seat. He might want to prove something this year to stay on the team. So we'll see what he does this year.
He did mention, obviously, A.J. Green is gone, and that is going to hurt. But he will get A.J. Green back eventually at some point this season. Add that is going to be John Ross's third year. And John Ross, obviously, was drafted as first-round wide receiver. He hasn't lived up to it, but he does have that ability there. So add him with Tyler Boyd, and that's a dynamic wide receiving duo. Add that to the fact that their defense is horrendous. And they're going to be playing catch-up in a lot of games. So there's some value to garbage time that we can't undervalue specifically when it comes to fantasy.
Yeah, those garbage time touchdowns, when they start pulling their starters on defense, when they're up 45-7, those can really save your week. Garbage time, like I said, could be really good. These last 5, we have somebody who's always hurt. We have a rookie. So we'll see how these guys do. We have Josh Allen, Derek Carr, Sam Darnold. We have Murray and Mariota. Mariota's always questionable to either return to the game or to start the game. And now he has Tannehill pushing him. How do you like these 5?
Well, you mentioned that Mariota is always questionable, and that's definitely frustrating from a standpoint of a fantasy owner. However, he has averaged about 14 to 15 games a year, so he usually does play. It's just going to be to what level he plays in those games that he comes in with the questionable tag and starts. Like last year when he was coming back from the nerve damage, they really limited his throws. And like I mentioned earlier, they tend to emphasize the running game more in Tennessee. So there is only so far that Mariota's stats can really go for you. Out of this group of guys, I'm going to say the 2 sophomore quarterbacks here are the most interesting, Sam Darnold and Josh Allen, for 2 different reasons. So Josh Allen, he showed that he can run the ball a little bit, which no one was really expecting for him to be able to utilize his athleticism, get out of the pocket, make some things happen with his legs, add some rushing touchdowns. Kind of played a lot like in his prime, Cam Newton. And we've seen that Cam has had a lot of, you mentioned it, peaks and valleys throughout his career, but those peaks led him to an MVP. And let me clarify, I'm not saying Josh Allen for MVP. I'm just saying that he can produce at a high enough level to be a relevant QB1 in your league. And then when it comes to Sam Darnold, they've put a lot of pieces around him. They want this guy to succeed. So between Le'Veon Bell, between the additions to the offensive line and Adam Gase going over there, I could see Sam Darnold taking the biggest leap out of this group, and to be the 23rd quarterback in most leagues, that's a league winner right there.
Yeah, we mentioned Tannehill earlier. Tannehill, when he played, he was really good. He threw up some numbers, and now that coach is coaching Sam Darnold, who can stay healthy, who can throw the ball. Let's see if he can take a step in this offense. I think he can. I think he can sneak into, that top 10 quarterback range if everything goes right, especially throwing the ball, because you have a dual threat running back in Lev Bell. So I think he's going to have the biggest jump this year. And then, Josh Allen, he's going to be an awesome streamer for bye weeks or injuries. You're not really going to want him as a starter just yet. I'd probably wait another year, see how he does, and then go from there.
Yeah, I would say the thing about Sam Darnold is he's the best quarterback that Adam Gase has had since working with Peyton Manning. Again, 2 different tiers. Peyton Manning was at a different stage in his career than Sam Darnold is as an ascending quarterback. But when you compare him to like Ryan Tannehill, obviously Ryan Tannehill, very inaccurate early on in his career, a converted wide receiver. Sam Darnold should have been the number 1 pick in a lot of people's minds, and 2 should have been the number 2 pick if you're the New York Giants, but story for another day.
Yeah, I do like their sophomore, these sophomore quarterbacks, but the other guy that we really haven't mentioned is Kyler Murray. The rookie. We can't really tell anything based off of preseason because they're running a vanilla offense. He's behind a terrible offensive line. He might turn into a Lamar Jackson type where he's going to be having to run, but it's not by choice. It's for his life, really. I have him at 24 just because I'm curious to see what he'll do this year.
Yeah, if this offense performs anywhere close to what it's doing in preseason, you just can't really trust it to turn to fantasy value. The one thing I would say is if this offense can perform anywhere how it has in the college game that led to Patrick Mahomes throwing for 800 yards in a meaningless game against Oklahoma, then that has some value in fantasy. Kyler Murray, if he could put up garbage time numbers, we talked about the value of garbage time. Well, this team is going to be behind in a lot of games, having to fight out of a lot of holes. The question I have for Kyler Murray is I'm not necessarily sold on the players around him right now. So David Johnson, obviously we saw what he could do a couple of years ago. He still has yet to prove that he can perform at that same level. especially around this offensive line. And then in the wide receiving game, Larry Fitzgerald, he's at the end of his rope. Christian Kirk, second year, going to be a big year for him. And then they got this guy, Isabella, too, who, again, does some interesting things, but I don't know if that's necessarily enough to be conducive to a well-run offense or specifically a high-scoring offense.
Yeah, this with Kyler Murray, there's more questions than answers right now. You might take him as, your 14th pick in your draft, just as a stash, or, you might star him after the draft, just to kind of keep an eye on him. But yeah, right now there's too many questions. Don't know how this offense is going to look. We don't know how Kingsbury's offense will perform at the pro level either, even though he had two prolific passers in college in Baker and Mahomes. We don't know if that'll travel to the NFL.
If you're getting Kyler Murray as a stash, then I would say that's the perfect range to get him at. Because obviously, I don't think anyone's pretty much drafting Kyler Murray as a number one quarterback unless you're in an extremely deep league. But if you're getting him as your backup or a speculative add in a 2-quarterback league, then that could potentially be where he signs, because in those formats, you're really just looking for someone that could be a league breaker. And if this offense, again, can put up what the air raid is known for in terms of the gaudy numbers, which is all that really matters in fantasy, then that might be a guy you target late.
Yeah, he'd be really good in a 2-quarterback league as well. But yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to follow him as the season goes.